this section, I'm going to go over setting up your stage controller, or also known as an editor node. This is a desktop machine or server that you will use to control the instance of Unreal Engine that is rendering on your LED wall. It does this by using multi-user over your network. This machine handles editing of your Unreal Engine project, file syncing, performance monitoring, and overall stage operation with Switchboard. We're going to install Unreal Engine. So you'll just want to download the Epic launcher from the Epic Games website. Here's the URL here. And then once you launch that up, you can go to library and you can add an engine. And then once you add an engine, you'll be able to select what version you want. We'll be using 5.1 for this. So everything will be in 5.1. So next we're going to set up the network. So if you go down to your little network card, you should be already connected into a network with your other systems, and this should be a isolated private network. So you don't want this directly connected to the internet because you're going to open up some of your machine settings so that you can use programs like free file sync and things like that to be able to just get access on all of your render machines, so that you're able to quickly move projects around and update projects as you go. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to turn off the firewall for private domains. We actually have the firewall off for all of our domains, but that's just because we have multiple layers of network protection, so we feel we're generally going to be all right. And then you want this to be set to private. Private is usually the only one. Private is generally the one that I usually turn off the firewall for. If we go to change advanced sharing settings, and in here we want to set our machine to be network discoverable. We want to turn on file and printer sharing. We want to turn on sharing so that everybody on the network can see and write in public files, so that when we create a folder that is public, any of the other machines on our network can see it. This is really good to just move around files quickly and to quickly access folders just from putting in the address in your Finder. You want to turn off password protection sharing. Now, if you are watching this video and you're crazy and you have the ability to customize your network to your workflow, you'll want to do that. These are the general settings that if you want to have an isolated network and have full control over sending things back and forth, these are just the settings that we've found. You won't really have restrictions. You aren't going to run into issues. Currently, we have our system set up with a file share, which I'll show you how to map a file share in a second. If you're unable to do a file share and you want to just build this system out right now and have it work with another render node, I'm going to show you an alternative method. So what you're going to do is you're going to create a local folder. You'd want to do this on your editor. And so what you'll want to do is create a folder. I'm just going to do it on the C drive. Usually I would recommend if you had like 2 internal drives or an external drive, you can even put this on, and this will be where your local files are stored. I'm just going to name this projects. And then if we right click that and go to properties, and then sharing, and then share, and then we want to add everyone, and then add, and then hit share. Okay, and then we're done. People without, yep, and then so this computer can access it shared with everyone, and then so we can close that. And you can see now that if we go to network and then we click on our machine, you can see our projects folder. If we were accessing this from a controller machine like a stage controller or an editor, you'd be able to then add projects to this or update projects with free file sync or manually. So we can map that drive so it becomes a drive that we can access. This is the same process that we use to map the file share, but you can also map the drive if you want to have a single drive that all of your systems are running from. So that would be on an editor, you could potentially just have a shared folder drive, and then we would map all of the render nodes to that shared folder drive. So that would make it so that we can run the project off of one file, which I generally do for smaller setups, but it's good on larger setups where you need redundancy to have a local copy as well. I'm going to show you how to map the drive as if it was a shared folder. So if you right click this PC and then map network drive, and then you're going to choose a drive letter. I usually choose V for virtual production, but that's already taken up. So let's do P for production. Going to need the IP address of the machine. And then this is our IP address of the machine, and then the folder. And if you hit finish, now we have that folder mapped to this computer. So now if we add something from there, so we take our image and we drop that into our projects folder. So now we have that image, and if we were on another machine, we'd now be able to access this image from the network drive here. Just to recap, that folder is actually local, but you would generally be setting this up across the network for multiple machines. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to install a VNC. I like to use Ultra VNC. You can download Ultra VNC from their website. And I know it looks kind of dodgy, but Ultra VNC works very well. We're going to just go through the setup of that. Next, and then I'm just going to put that at our program files. Yep, that sounds good. So first you want to just run an Ultra VNC on your system as a server so that your other computer can connect to it. I believe it's already running on this because we put it as a server install. You'll just want to put in the IP address of the machine. This is if you're trying to talk to a render node or an editor or going from machine to machine. I like to use the VNC. This also connects, I believe, with some tracking systems like Moses and other control modules. This is the IP address of my render node, and then this is the port number. So I'm just going to connect to it, and then I have a password on mine. So this is a render node that is already set up for my system. Okay, so I changed my display settings to 1080 so that I am the same resolution as the screen that I'm controlling, just so it's easier. Once that loads up, you will full screen. It will be like we were on that machine. So in this video, I'm going to go over setting up a render node. So this is a machine or server that you want to dedicate toward rendering an end display cluster. And then you may be potentially using another machine to run the editor instance of Unreal. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is some display settings. So if you just right click on your desktop and then hit display settings, first it's going to load up your display. If you have multiple displays plugged in, this window would look a little different and you'd see there's two displays. We want to take a look at scale. We want our desktop to render always at 100% if this is going to be our rendering machine. If end display tries to render to this machine and it has scaling on, this is going to fight our render, as it should be pixel mapped 1-for-1 to your desktop scale. We want to make sure HDR is off, even if we're using HDR in our pipeline, and you want to make sure 3D and nightlight are off. I'm going to show you how to change the EDIDs. So what we want to do is make sure that we basically lock the output of the GPU. So once you've saved these settings and then loaded them again, you'll be able to lock the GPU's output. So if it comes undone or anything like that, you don't have anything fighting your signals. This helps for when you have multiple render nodes in a cluster and you want the Genlock to be supplied by one machine. You can set them up like this and they should not change while you're doing configuration or testing or changing other things. This is just connected to a TV and we're actually going to put this, we're going to create a profile for 60 Hertz. It's a 1920 by 1080 resolution screen. So I'm just going to put that. That would be sending out to our LED wall. That whatever you decide in your pipeline that you want your signal to be. If it's going to be under 4K, you want to go a 4K output, because then you can use KVMs or a matrix or something like that further down the line if that's something that you want to do for a larger cluster node. For right now, we're just going to be using a TV, and then we want to put this to 60 Hertz because that's what the TV I believe normally runs at, and that's what we are going to be able to Genlock to. You just have to test it. And then once it's been tested, you can hit OK. So now you can see in the custom here, we have this guy. We're going to apply that. If we go to, so now we're going to want to go to topology, view system topology under workstation. And then you're going to want to scroll down to the monitor that's plugged in. So we see Toshiba TV. This could be named, you could name this after your LED wall configuration, or configure this however you need to. Right now I'm just leaving it Toshiba TV because that works fine for me. So if we go to EDID, make sure that you have your output selected and then export EDID. So this machine hasn't had the drive mapped yet, so I'm just going to map the drive real quick. So we'll go through that again. I'm going to choose P again, and then we're going to do projects. So now what we're doing is we're controlling our render node from our editor machine through a VNC, and then we're going to have both of those machines mapped to this drive, and we're going to have that be exposed to the network so that we can send files back and forth to each other. And you can also see the projects folder here. So if we wanted to add the EDID here, we can just do it here. We can create a folder. Okay, so it just needed to reload. I'm going to rename this, and we're just going to call this EDID. So the way that I like to do this is generally in projects, we would make a folder. Sometimes you need to just reset it when we're using it like this. We'll just name this render node setup. You can name this whatever you want, because if you actually are working on a project, but for the video's sake, and then I would put my EDIDs file in there. So I'm just going to drag this in there. And yet again, it'll probably have to be reset. So now here's where your Unreal Engine projects would go. So if you had to break your Unreal Engine projects into different categories, you could also do that here. I'm working on a project where we're breaking it down into episodes so that we can have a bit of a way of keeping track of things. And then so we'll just name this new one Unreal Projects. And then we would put our Unreal Engine projects there. But for right now, we're just exporting an EDID, and that was just to set up the file configuration for us. And then in here, we're going to just name this TV 60 Hertz EDID. And then just save that. And once you save that, so now what we want to do is we actually want to load it. And then go to Browse, and then we're going to go to Projects, Render Node, EDID, and then select our EDID. And what this is going to do is it's going to lock the EDID with a file so that when you unplug and plug your system or make any changes, it will not undo your configuration. And then so we can close that. And then so now we're going to go to synchronize displays. And then to set up Genlock, we're going to select on this system and then go to server settings and then choose our external house sync. So our external house sync will have to match whatever the refresh rate is of our custom resolution EDID that we created. And you just want to think about what that's going to be for your production. I'm hoping to cover this in another series. So once you've selected that, you want to just hit apply. Make sure that your screens don't freak out and hit OK. And then as you're coming out of here, you want to just hit apply. And then make sure that it stayed locked. And then if you go to your topology, you want to see external sync source signal here. And then if you scroll down, it should say timing the display is locked to the house signal. So now this would be the master in your display cluster. So if this would be the master render node in your system. This would be the one that is kind of controlling all of the other render node sync if you're using the Ethernet. If you're directly connecting your Genlock signal to each individual sync card, you will have to go through every single machine and do this same process, and every once in a while it will come disconnected because just the master clock does that sometimes. If you chain it, you'll be able to select a master, and then in synchronized displays you'll want to select on another system, and then it should automatically detect that sync signal, and then you will see a frame lock sync pulse, and then that should say present, and then you should see sync to the frame lock sync pulse. We are going to now change the background to something a little more custom for a render node. So generally on a render node, you don't want the background screen to be icons and all of your desktop and all of those things, because it doesn't look quite as good. You want it to be a simple background. So what we're going to do for that is we're actually going to go to a pattern generator. So you want to go to vioso.com /test pattern -generator. And then that will bring you to this page. So what you can do is you can put in your pattern name. So we'll just call this render node 1. We'll just put 1 display, because for ours that's all it will be. You can do multiple displays. It shows us our aspect ratio. We can change the grid color, something a little more VP Toolkit-esque. That's pretty cool. You can choose an overlap in pixels. Put that to 0. You can choose total size in pixels, overlap on or off. We can turn the overlap off, and then we're going to put logo. So then we're going to have grid size, which we can control density of the grid. You may want to go less and have something more simple. You can do the width of your grid, so you can make it really small or non-existent, and then you can add a color bar. You can invert it and make it white. You can add hatching. You can upload a logo. Okay, so we uploaded our logo on there. I mean, you could use the VP Toolkit one if you'd like, but you're probably going to use your own company's logo, which is fine. That's why we make these videos, support you guys. So we'll just save that image, and then that image will save. Generally, you'd want to remove your shortcuts or all of them that you can from that server. You can also go in and remove the recycling bin. I usually do that when we're doing larger clusters. And then you can go in and have the taskbar hide itself if you just go to taskbar settings. So next I'm going to show you how to set up free file sync. We're going to use this to send files from our local copy or our file share copy to local copies of render machines. This is so every single NDisplay render node within our cluster has its own individual local copy. Currently, this is what Switchboard and multi-user like the most, and this is the most redundant way that you can run these systems. So this is what we're doing a lot on stages. So I'm going to show you how to set that up. First, we're going to download Free File Sync, freefilesync.org. So Free File Sync is kind of a weird choice for this, but it seems to be what everybody's go-to is. I've used it on tons of projects, and I use it for all kinds of things, from distributing the plugin to just moving projects around. I'll show you a little more once we get it set up. So we just want to get that for Windows. Once that's done downloading, we're going to install it. My favorite thing about Free File Sync is instead of an ad, you get a random animal. Always a cute animal too. So now we're going to open Free File Sync. So the main parts of the UI is, here's your configurations. This is where you save and create and load different configurations. What we want to do is we want to choose a file path. So we're going to take where an Unreal Engine project would be, like in the rest of our setup would be the render node setup, and then Unreal Engine projects. So we'll take our local shared folder path, which is projects. We set this up in local disk C, projects, and then render node setup. We're going to just treat this like our project folder. So I'm just going to push this around because on this setup right now, I don't have a Unreal Engine project ready for this. So we'll get the folder path to that, and then we'll put that in our where it's coming from. And then I'm actually going to copy that and paste it here into where it's going. We want to make sure that we switch this to mirror, so it mirrors what you have in your first path. So I'm just going to put the IP address of my render node. We still have our render node here available through our VNC viewer. All set up and ready to go. We're actually going to set up a folder path in here. So if we go to our C drive, we're going to go to projects. We're going to create the same folder path that we have on our editor node. And then we want to just make sure that this project is sharing properly. So if we go to sharing and we go to share, we want to select everyone and then add them and make sure that it's read and write. And then, so this is, again, this is what we do on our closed network, because this is a lot of access across these folders. For when you have a network that is isolated compared to the rest of your network, you can kind of open it up like this so that we can send files back and forth. So share that. And then hit done. So we're just going to close that. So now if we go back to our editor node, we should be able to access that file path. So let's see here. Let's just copy this, and then I'll put that into my file path. And see, now we're in this folder. So if we take the grid that we had in our old setup, move it over to the folder that is located on the render node, we can now go to our render node, and we'll see that if we go to projects, render node setup, that grid is now there. So we're going to copy what would generally be a whole Unreal Engine project. I usually recommend to just have the project folder, but I'm just going to pretend like this is the project folder. So past this path here, it would just be all of your content folder and all of the rest of your needed project folders would be after this. You can do an entire set of projects if you're doing a more complicated setup, but try different ways of doing this and get comfortable with it, because that's the point of learning and understanding what's going on here. So now if we compare, we can see that there's an EDID and an Unreal Engine project folder that are not currently in our render node version of this folder. So if we hit synchronize and hit start, I generally don't worry about this. It just means that if it had to erase a full file, so it probably erased that grid file. Generally, our render nodes, we would consider them disposable. So any projects that are on there get overwritten pretty frequently. So you don't want to keep things there unless you're keeping them in the original folder that you're syncing from. On the render node, it cannot access the recycling bin. So we're just going to ignore that. And then also, once you have this set up, you want to just save it. Kind of funny is we can also keep that in this folder. I'm just going to call this editor to render node because we're sending a file from the editor to the render node. So also another thing to note is you can create more of these. So if you're pushing to multiple render nodes, you would then just do the same process per render node, and then you would just duplicate the project here. If you ever had any issues, this gets a little dodgy, but you can also reverse this. So if you needed to pull the project back and get an older version of the project from the render nodes, say something happens on your editor and there's a mistake, but you have a copy of that in your render node, you can always kind of flip that. Another thing to note that I highly recommend is to put a filter in. Generally, I just copy my perforce filter because it works in here just fine. So you can either do that, do some research on how to get it. While we're actually doing our Unreal Engine workflow, we're going to stash local copies. So with this workflow, what you'll do is every time you make a change to your project, you want to save that project, close it, hit compare, and you'll see the changes to your project that lives locally on your editor machine in relation to what you're syncing to, which is your render node copy. This is what's going to be rendered in end display, and this is what we're going to drive a editor to control our end display. So we're just going to want to compare and then sync, and then we would then fire up our editor and then fire up our render node in Switchboard. Once we want to reset our setup and save our settings from our multi-user session, we would persist changes in Unreal Engine. Once we shut down the render node, you'd want to hit compare and then synchronize, and that would take our local editor changes and send them to the render node again. We would then run our editor node again, and it would be in sync with multi-user and our environment project.